Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday. Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Tuesday? Paul in the great Northwest, Shandora in the Bronx, Sharon, I'm so glad you're here, Lila Tov, and happy Yom HaAtzmaut. We're celebrating the establishment of the State of Israel. Yehud in South Carolina, Bill in mid-Missouri, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Aoife in Florida, Chaim in Florida. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is dedicated by our own Sharon Frant Brooks in honor of the yahrzeit of my father, Milton Frant, Michael David Ben Yecheskel, on the 6th of Iyar, 5784, which is today, May 14, 2024. Sharon, may the neshama have a great, great aliyah in the world of souls. May your dad's memory always be for a blessing. I know that he is cavelling in Olam Haba, watching you and the way that you impact so many people in Jewish education and so many other ways. I just know, even though we haven't met in person yet, I know how big an impact you are on all the people around you. And thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. May you and all your loved ones be blessed in all your ways. We say amen. Let's do this. Okay, we are going to pick this up. Our daf today is page 74 here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 8 in chapter 5. But yesterday we did a double that was a kind of a long double. So we're actually picking it up today at the very top of page 73b. Okay, the Gemara relates that a certain gentile mortgaged a house to Rav Mari bar Rachel. So Mari bar Rachel was a prominent sage, and we've heard many sages have names like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and Shimon bar Yochai, and it's always the sage and his father's name. Why is Rav Mari mentioned with his mother's name, Rachel? Very interesting story. This, I'm sure, would make a colorful movie if I knew more of the details. But basically, his mother, Rachel, was the daughter of the great Amora Shmuel, whose rulings we'll encounter even in today's daf, and we encounter all the time. She, at some point, was taken into captivity, taken hostage. And while there, I don't know exactly what the circumstances were, but one of her presumably one of her captors, a fellow named Isur, got her pregnant, and this would eventually be Rav Mari. But I don't know if it was exactly, a rape, in the sense that she married Isser, and that Isser became a Jew. So he ended up joining the Jewish people and the Jewish faith. So Rav Mari was conceived by a non-Jew, but apparently he had already become a Jew by the time Rav Mari was born. So there you go. But because he ended up being such a prominent sage and he was not conceived in sanctity, as the phrase goes, he ended up being named, sort of his official name as a sage is Rav Mari bar Rachel. Okay, so Rav Mari bar Rachel had lent money to a non-Jew, and the way it worked in that time and place, presumably in Bava, so in Persia, in the area of Persia that's Babylonia, and he lent money to a Gentile, and in return, he received a mortgage on the Gentile's house. This house was owned by the Gentile, but not occupied by the Gentile. Probably the Gentile was a well-to-do businessman who had lots of properties, but was short of cash at a certain point. So he said, I need some cash. Lend me this money, and you'll have a mortgage on this house. And under the laws at that time in that place, having a mortgage on the house means you can live in the house. So Rav Mari was living in that house that belonged to the Gentile. So if you lend money to somebody, and in addition to getting the money back at the, when the loan is repaid, you're also getting to live rent-free in that property, that is an interest-bearing loan, right? The free rent acts as interest on the loan. Why is it permitted? Because the owner of the house, the borrower of the money, was not Jewish. It is permitted to lend money at interest to non-Jews. Okay, so that's the setup. So afterward, the Gentile, after he borrowed the money and gave Rav Mari the house for a year, the Gentile sold the house to Rava, right? Another Amora, another sage. And Rav Mari waited for 12 months of the year to pass. And then he took the amount of money necessary to pay rent for the house for the coming year, not for the year that he already occupied, because he received that in exchange for lending the money to the Gentile. Now he wants to stay there for another year, so he brings the money for that rent to the house of Rava, who was now the owner of the house, because he had purchased the underlying property from the Gentile, who presumably needed more money for whatever was going on in his life. He brings this rent money to Rava, and Rav Mari says to Rava, this fact that I did not bring the rental fee for the house to the master until now is because an unspecified mortgage is in effect for a period of 1 year. Right? So he had said, the Gentile said, if you lend me this much money, then you'll have a mortgage on my house. Rav Mari agreed. They didn't agree how long the loan was going to be outstanding for, how long the mortgage would be good for. And the law in that time and place was that with an unspecified mortgage of that kind, you get a year. So Rav Mari had the right to live in that house for a year. Beyond that year, the Gentile could, if he's the owner of the house, he could remove Rav Mari from the house at any time by paying back the loan. Right, so he can remove Rav Mari, but in order to remove him, he has to pay back the loan. Less than a year, right, after 8 months, if he had sought to do that, he couldn't remove Rav Mari because he gets a year in an unspecified mortgage. So even if he paid back the loan early, Rav Mari would get that year. Now that the year has passed, he comes to Rava. He understands that the house has been sold and that his new landlord, as it were, the actual owner of the house is Rava. He says, up until now, I had a right to live in that house. Now he can remove me anytime by paying back the loan. So I don't have, any indelible right to be in this house. So I'm coming to you now to pay rent for the house. I'd like to have a guarantee that I can stay in that house for the coming year. So I'll pay you the rent since you're now the owner. And he explained, as I said, if that Gentile wanted to remove me from the house by paying back the loan, he couldn't remove me from the house until now that a year has passed. Consequently, the house actually belonged to me effectively for that year, and I was not required to pay rent. But now, since the Gentile can remove me from the house by repaying the loan, and the house belongs to you. So therefore, let the master now, meaning Rava, take the rental fee for the house for the coming year. So Rava said to him, had I known that this house was mortgaged to the master, meaning to you, Rav Mari, Baruch, I would not have purchased it at all, as I would have given you the chance to purchase it first. It's very similar to the law that if you're selling a field and your neighbor has an adjoining field, before you go sell it to some third party, you have to give your neighbor the chance to buy it at whatever price you could get from, any stranger. He has a chance to match that price because it's very convenient for him to have two adjoining fields that he can, farm as one. And likewise, since Rav Mari is already living in that house, if Rav had known that, then he would have said, you buy the house. It's much better for you. You're already living in it. You go buy the house. So now that he has bought the house, Rava did buy the house from the Gentile, and Rav Mari's, at his door saying he'd like to pay rent for the coming year. So says Rava, now therefore I will act toward you according to the law of the Gentiles. This is in a positive way, as I assumed the rights previously held by the Gentile. So according to the Gentile law, as long as the borrower does not remove the lender by paying back the money, he also does not take a rental fee for the house, as there is no prohibition against a Gentile paying or receiving interest. Therefore, I too will not take a rental fee for the house from you until I remove you by forcing the Gentile to pay back the loan. How can Rava force the Gentile to pay back the loan to Rav Mari? I mean, Rava had connections. He was in good with the house of the exilarch. The exilarch was in good with the king. So maybe he could use his influence to sort of force the Gentile to pay back the loan. But what he's really saying is that until the Gentile pays back the loan, you can live in that house rent-free. Very generous by Rava, because now he owns a property that he can't live in and that is not generating any income, but it reflects the esteem that the sages held for each other, and reinforces that you can lend at interest or give interest in a loan with a Gentile that you couldn't do with your fellow Jew. Now, the Gemara relates a different story. Rava of Barnish said to Rav Ashi, the master sees the sages who consume interest. Right? So he's saying there are sages who are consuming interest. Obviously, they're not lending and charging interest for it, but it must be that we've got another one of these nuanced situations where they're really just trying to transact business, but because money is paid in advance of delivery, and it's held for a while in return for what could be construed as a service, and then the value is returned, that it actually amounts to a prohibited interest situation. So let's see what this one is. Rava of Barnish said to Rav Ashi, the master sees the sages who consume interest as they give people money for wine in the month of Tishrei, and they select the wine later in the month of Tevet. Right? So if you went to the wine merchant and you said, I'm going to buy this barrel of wine right here, and I'm giving you the money now, right? I'm going to pick it up in a few months. So since you already bought it, and it's your barrel that happens to be sitting in the warehouse of the seller, there's no problem. But if you're saying, here, take the money, and then this is for a barrel that you'll give me, in a few months from now. So now we have the issue, well, we don't know what the price of that barrel is going to be a few months from now. If it's worth more than it's worth right now, then what you've got is money that's being given now for a value that's going to be delivered later that's greater than the money that was given. And then you have the problem of prohibited interest. So is that what's going on? So, says the note, had they taken the wine immediately upon payment, there is a chance that it would have spoiled. Now, in return for paying for the wine in advance, they receive the benefit of guaranteeing that the wine they receive will not be spoiled. Right. In other words, he's saying, I'm not paying for this barrel. I'm paying for a barrel of wine. Right? And the seller is saying, yeah, I'll give you a barrel of wine in a few months from now. So how is this not prohibited interest? So Rav Ashi said to him, they too gave the money at the outset for wine, but they did not give it for vinegar. That which was wine at the outset is still wine, and that which became vinegar was vinegar when they paid for it, but they did not know it. It was at the time of selection that they merely selected the wine that they had paid for previously. Since they agreed to buy wine, not vinegar, the benefit of actually receiving wine does not constitute interest. So presumably here, the price of wine was stable. So they don't have the problem that the wine might have appreciated. What the issue is that you're taking a chance that the barrel might spoil. And since the seller is assuming that risk and saying, I will provide you an actual barrel of wine, not, this particular barrel, and that if it spoils, I'm going to replace it. which then it really looks like a loan because it's the seller undertaking that risk that he might have to replace it in order to pay back, right, the money that he took in earlier. But they're not saying that. What he's saying is any wine that ended up becoming vinegar later, there was something in it, microscopic level that was already, the seeds of that spoilage were already present in the barrel. We just didn't know it. What I'm paying for is a barrel of wine, not vinegar, right? And so you're just going to select for me from your many barrels one that is wine. As long as it's not vinegar, it's fine. And it must be that the price of the market was stable, so they don't have that issue. The Gemara relates, Ravina would give money in advance to the people of the fortress, Akra, at the river Shanvata, in order to buy wine to be supplied after the grape harvest. And when they supplied the wine, they would pour an extra jug, kufita, of wine for him as a gift, although there was no stipulation between them requiring this. So Ravina came before Rav Ashi to ask whether this involved interest. And Ravina said to him, is it permitted to do this? And Rav Ashi said to him, yes, it is permitted, as they forego payment for the extra wine to your benefit in order to maintain good relations with you. Since the additional wine is not provided as consideration for the advance payment, there is no problem of interest. A seller can throw something in. He's not doing it because you paid him in advance. He's doing it because he likes you as a customer. He wants to keep you happy. He wants to keep you as a customer. And he's getting value by giving you this bonus jug of wine, which is happy customer, likely to come back again next year. Ravina said to him, but that's not the problem that I'm asking about. It's not the extra jug of wine. The problem is that the land is not theirs. What does this mean? The people of the fortress at Shanvata worked land belonging to others who abandoned their fields because they could not pay the real estate taxes. The people of the fortress paid the taxes and were therefore able to use the fields. So Ravina was concerned that perhaps they did not own the grapes and were therefore unable to forego payment for the additional amount as it did not belong to them. Right? He's saying that whatever little extra they're giving me, where are they getting it from? Right? If these are people who are friendly with the government and they're taking over somebody's land who, lost his land because he couldn't pay the taxes to the government, well, those people never agreed to give up their land. It's like they were chased away by soldiers who would kill them for not paying taxes. And that's why they don't have their land. But they didn't agree to sell it since it's still their land and didn't authorize these people in the fortress, presumably soldiers, to remove grapes and wine from the land. It's stolen property. How can I accept that? So Rav Ashi said to him, the land, meaning all the land, in the kingdom is liened to the king as payment for taxes. And the king says, whoever pays the tax may consume the produce of the land. So consequently, the ones who pay the taxes have ownership of the wine by dint of Dina de Malchusa Dina. The law of the land is the law. Right? So we don't live in Israel during a time when the Jews back then have sovereignty over the land of Israel and set the laws, right? In fact, they were living in Persia and they were subject to the laws of the Persian king. And the Persian king said, whoever pays the tax on the land can consume the produce of the land. If you don't pay the tax on the land, you don't have a right to the produce of the land. So Rav Ashi was saying to Ravina, you can rely on the law of the land to accept this payment from those people as if it's their own, because it is their own. The Gemara relates that Rav Papa said to Rava, let the master see these sages who pay money for the tax, a karga, the tax on behalf of other people, and afterward make them work more than is reasonable for the amount of money that they paid. And Rava said to him, so this is going to be the same idea, that under the law of the land, right, somebody who pays the real estate taxes can consume the produce. And in that kingdom, they also had a head tax, right? And if you can't afford to pay the head tax, then you don't own yourself. And somebody who steps in and pays the head tax for you can demand that you work for them. That was the law in that kingdom. So Rava said to him, now, if I were dead, I could not say the explanation of this matter to you. So it is good that you ask me while I am still alive, as I know that this is what Rav Sheshes said about this matter. The document of servitude of these people lies in the treasury of the king. All of his subjects are considered the servants of the king. And the king said, the one who does not pay the head tax shall serve the one who does pay the head tax. And consequently, by dint of the law of the kingdom, they can have these people work for them, even if it's a lot of work. Now the Gemara relates, Rav Seoram, the brother of Rava, would forcefully seize people who were not acting properly and have them carry Rava's sedan chair. So Rava said to him, you acted correctly. As we learn, if you see a Jew who does not behave properly, from where is it derived that you are permitted to have him work? And the verse states, of them you may take your slaves forever, comma, and over your brothers. Now, this comma is not there. There are no commas in the Torah. So what the verse actually says is, of them you may take your slaves forever, meaning the Canaanites, the non-Jews, and over your brothers, right? You can have a Hebrew slave, which is only for 6 years. But since the way the phrasing in the Torah is, it actually you could attach that clause to the previous part of the verse and say, of them you may take your slaves forever and over your brothers. So it is derived from this conjunctive and linking the two clauses of the verse that there are circumstances where it is permitted to treat a fellow Jew as if he were a slave. Meaning when you're punishing him for making a big Halul Hashem or for being a sinner or for just, not being the kind of Jew that he should be in that community at that time. So one might have thought that this is the law even if a Jew acts properly. No. To counter this, the verse states in the continuation, and over your brothers, the children of Israel, you shall not rule one over another with rigor. You shall not enslave them or work them too hard. But if they don't behave like members of the community, should, if there's something that they're doing that's a disgrace to the community, then if you actually have the authority and the enforcement power to do it, so you can work them, it's tough love to, God willing, get them back on the straight and narrow. Rav Chama said, with regard to one who gave money to another to purchase wine for him, and the other, meaning the agent, was negligent and did not purchase it for him. So the agent must pay the one who gave him the money according to the going rate of wine, where? In the port city of Zolshaphat, where the main wine market was located, and he must purchase the wine according to the price in that market, even if it is more expensive than the amount that he was given initially. So meaning somebody agreed to take on the agency to go purchase wine, and then he, forgot about it, neglected it. Something came up, and he didn't do it. Well, he has to fulfill his agency. He's got to go make it right. He took the money. He's got to go buy the wine. Now, because he delayed and he forgot about it, by the time he goes to the market, maybe wine has increased in price. And he's got to buy it at that price because that was his obligation. Amemar said, I said this law before Rav Zeved of Nehardea, and when he heard it, he said, when Rav Chama said this, he said that statement in a case where the buyer asked the agent to purchase wine without specification concerning exactly which wine he wanted. He just said, get wine for me. But if the principal said to the agent, buy this particular wine for me, right? Buy wine from Shimon, the vintner, his vintage from 2 years ago. It's very good. I like that wine. Make sure you go get that wine. So if that was the agency and the agent forgot about it, didn't do it, then he's not going to be liable to go and buy wine to replace that, to go and buy wine for the principal. If he said to the agent, buy this specific wine for me, the agent who neglected to buy the wine is not obligated to buy it at a higher price later. Right? I mean, if he can still get that wine, he should complete his agency. But if it's no longer possible to get it at the price that it was selling for when he was given the money and the mission to go buy it, then he doesn't have to make it right. And can you guess what? You would think, but it's more specific. It was more clear what the agency was. Yes, but because it was so specific, who can say that when he got there, Shimon the vintner had wine for sale? Maybe Shimon the vintner had sold all of his wine that year. Maybe something went wrong. Maybe he had a fire in his warehouse. Who knows? So maybe that particular wine wasn't going to be available, and this agent was never going to be able to fulfill his agency. Since he was given an agency that had the possibility of being fulfilled or not fulfilled, if he neglects to fulfill it, then he's lucky, he's off the hook. But if he was told something much more general that for sure he could fulfill, then he has to go fulfill it, even if it's going to cost him more, right? So if he was told specific, then he's not obligated to buy it at the higher price. As when he was sent to buy it initially, who can say that the owner would have sold it to him? The one who gave the money to the agent was aware of the fact that the agent might not be able to successfully purchase the specific wine, and consequently, the obligation of the agent is simply to return the money, and nothing may be added to that sum due to the prohibition of interest. Rav Ashi said even if he asked the agent to buy wine without specification, the agent is also not obligated to buy wine later for more than the amount he was given. Why? Because the implicit obligation that the agent accepted upon himself to pay the one who hired him with wine of a higher value than the amount of money he received, this is a transaction with inconclusive consent, an asmachta. As any situation where one will have to pay more money than he received is similar to the payment of a fine. And the acceptance of an asmachta does not effect acquisition, as his acceptance is assumed to be insincere. And the Gemara asks, and according to Rav Ashi, in what way is this case different from that which we learned in a Mishna on page 104a, concerning a rental agreement for land in which a sharecropper agreed to cultivate a field in return for a share of the produce, and he wrote, if I let the field lie fallow and I do not cultivate it, I will pay with the best quality produce. So in that case, the sharecropper agreed to pay the amount that he caused the owner to lose due to his inactivity. And it was not ruled an unenforceable asmachta. And so the Gemara answers, there, the matter is in his power, as he can decide whether to work the field or not. By contrast, here, the matter is not in his power to determine whether or not to buy the wine, as perhaps the owner will not sell it to him. New subject, and we are on page 74a now. Rava said in the case of these three people who gave money to one individual in order for him to purchase an item for them, and he purchased the item for only one of them, he has actually purchased it for all of them. All three share ownership of that which was purchased, and the one for whom the item was purchased does not have any additional claim on the merchandise. And we said this ruling only when the agent did not wrap up and seal each person's money separately, but rather put all the money in one bundle. But if he did wrap it up and seal each person's money separately, and then he spent the money of only one of them, so then he purchased the item only for the one whom he purchased it, and he did not purchase the item for those for whom he did not purchase it. Rav Papi said, in the name of Rava, in this case of labeling an item with a marker known as a situmta, which was commonly used to indicate that specific merchandise had been sold, right? Like I go to the wine merchant's warehouse and we look around his barrels and he says to me, this barrel right here, oh, that's such a good barrel of wine. And I say, I want that barrel. And I pay him. I'm not going to pick it up now because his storehouse is a much better place to store wine than, my house where there's no cool sheltered place. So I'm going to leave it here. But now we've marked a specific barrel. Okay, so there's already been a purchase and sale. It's my barrel. It might be stored at his warehouse, but it's my barrel because we marked it. Right? Let's see. which was a marker which was usually commonly used to indicate that specific merchandise had been sold. So even though the buyer has not yet paid and the item was still located in the seller's warehouse, the labeling affects acquisition of the merchandise for the buyer. Ooh, interesting. So if we mark that barrel, even if I haven't paid for it yet, that's my barrel. I've acquired it. I've made a kinyan on it by marking it. Very interesting. So now, what if we agree on a purchase price and the value of the wine goes down? Is it that now I've lent him money or he's lent me money because I didn't have to pay for it at that time? And when I finally do pay him the money, is he getting more than he was entitled to and therefore it's interest? Or are we simply saying, well, I owe him the money. The money is the money. Right? So what I owe him, let's say, is 100 dinars. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether wine goes up or down. I now owe him 100 dinars. And at some point later, I'll pay him 100 dinars. But that wine is already mine. Right? So let's see if that's the way it's working. So the labeling affects acquisition of the merchandise for the buyer. So the Gemara asks, with regard to what law, what halacha was this said? What is the significance of this acquisition? So Rav Chaviva said it means to actually affect acquisition. In other words, that the merchandise belongs to the buyer for all intents and purposes, as I just described. But the rabbis said it affects acquisition only concerning a case where one of the parties withdraws from the transaction, and then because they made this pseudo acquisition, the one who then backs out of the transaction would be required to accept upon himself the curse of he who exacted payment from the people of the generation of the flood and the people of the generation of the dispersion, meaning the Tower of Babel, meaning God, will in the future exact payment from whoever does not stand by his word. So the court does not force the parties to complete the transaction, but rather applies the curse to the one who withdraws for his lack of integrity. But they could back out, right? In other words, there's going to be a curse from, that God will exact retribution, but an earthly court won't. This is not an enforceable transaction yet. One of them could back out, legally speaking, although he would, have this curse hanging over his head. So the Gemara concludes, and the law is that the marker affects the acquisition of the item only in that the one who withdraws from the transaction will have that curse over his head. But we don't say that an enforceable transaction had been completed when they marked a barrel. It's not going to become enforceable until he acquires it and money changes hands, or something more definitive than the marker. Now the Mishna teaches that if the seller, so back to our Mishnah number 8 here in chapter 5, the Mishnah said that if the seller was first among the reapers, meaning he harvested his field before everyone else did, before the price was publicized, but he's got the produce on hand. So somebody can come and buy produce from him. And he's the first one to have the produce available because he harvested his field early. So the Mishnah said that if the seller was the first among the reapers, he may set a price with the buyer only when the produce that he has is ready for delivery. And Rav says, if only 2 actions needed to complete the labor to prepare the produce were lacking, then he may set a price, as the produce is viewed as if it had already been prepared, right? So very interesting. So when we said first among the reapers, right? So what does that mean? So you cut down all the wheat, and now you've got a pile of unsifted, unwinnowed, wheat that's hasn't become flour. It hasn't even become, raw grain, right? If all you've done is cut down the stalks, so you harvested, but this is not ready to be sold. On the other hand, it's in your power to get it ready for sale, right? You're not waiting for the hand of heaven to do anything. That's what's going to be going on here, right? He may not set a price. And Shmuel says if the actions needed to complete the labor are performed by human hands, then, wait a minute, let me just go back a second. Rav says, if only two actions needed to complete the labor to prepare the produce were lacking, then he may set a price, as the produce is viewed as if it had already been prepared for sale. But if three actions were lacking, then he may not set a price, as the item creates a concern of interest because it might take a long time and now it's too soon. And the whole idea of you can set a price before the market price is set is because you've got the grain on hand ready to sell. But if there are three actions lacking, well, who's to say that you're going to be able to perform those three actions all before the market price is set, and somebody might end up, giving you money and then taking delivery at a time when he could have bought elsewhere for cheaper or for more. There's going to be an interest problem, and that's why only if two actions are missing, like maybe winnowing and sifting, but if three actions, whatever other stages in the process of getting the grain ready for sale are missing, then you can't do this. But Shmuel says, if the actions needed to complete the labor are performed by human hands alone, then even if 100 actions were lacking, he may set a price. But if the necessary actions must be accomplished by the hand of heaven, then even if only one action is lacking, he may not set a price, right? Because if what you need is, for example, the wind that you're going to use for winnowing, well, maybe the wind will not blow at all, and you'll not be able to ever finish this grain. You can't, if you're depending on some action that is not in your control, then you can't set that price. Now, the Gemara challenges Rav's opinion. We learned in the Mishnah that he may set a price on a stack of grain, a stack. But there are still several actions that are lacking: placing it in the sun to dry, and threshing, and winnowing. There are three actions that are lacking. And yet the Mishnah rules that he may set a price. And the Gemara responds, the Mishnah is discussing a case where he already placed it in the sun and it dried. Consequently, there are only two actions lacking. The Gemara says, well, according to Shmuel, who says that if the actions remaining are to be accomplished by the hand of heaven, even if only one action is lacking, he may not set a price. So how does he explain the Mishnah? In the case of the Mishnah, the produce lacks winnowing, which is done by the hand of heaven, since winnowing can be done only when there is wind. And the Gemara answers, it is possible to winnow with sieves when the wind is not blowing. Although this is done only in exigent circumstances, since it is possible to perform the action entirely by human hands, it is permitted to set a price. The Mishnah teaches that one may set a price for a large basket of grapes. Based on this, the Gemara challenges the opinion of Rav, but there are still several actions that are lacking. Warming in a stack, bringing the grapes to the wine press, treading on them, drawing the wine out into the pit where it is stored. And the Gemara answers, this can be explained as Rav Chia teaches concerning a difficulty raised from the next clause of the Mishnah, that the Mishnah is not discussing setting a price on olives immediately after they were picked, but rather for a stack of warmed olives. And here also it is speaking about a price for a stack of warmed olives. And the Gemara challenges, but there are still three actions that are lacking. And the Gemara explains the Mishnah is discussing a place where the local custom is that the one who purchases the grapes is the one who draws the wine out of the wine press. Consequently, there are only two actions remaining to complete the labor before the merchandise will be ready for purchase. The Mishnah teaches that one may set a price for a vat of olives. Based on this, the Gemara challenges the opinion of Rav. But there are still several actions that are lacking. Warming the olives in a stack, bringing the olives to the olive press, pressing them, and drawing the oil out of the pit where it is stored. And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Chia teaches a baraisa with a different version of this statement, which reads, for a stack of olives that has already been warmed, And the Gemara challenges, but there are still three actions that are lacking. And the Gemara answers that the Mishnah is discussing a place where the local custom is that the one who purchases the olives is the one who draws the oil, and therefore there's only two actions lacking. And again, the point is that it is in the control of the seller to finish whatever processing is needed for delivery, and therefore, because he harvested first or brought it to market first, he's able to set a price even before the market price is publicized, because he's got the goods on hand. And we say he's got the goods on hand even if they're not ready for delivery, because whatever actions are lacking to get them ready for delivery are in the control of the seller, as opposed to where he needs, the sun to shine or the wind to blow or something like that. The Mishnah teaches that one may set a price for the clumps of clay prepared for use by a potter. Based on this, the Gemara challenges the opinion of Rav. Why is this permitted? But there are still several actions that are lacking. Rolling them out to the proper size, drying them, putting them into a kiln, burning them, and removing them from the kiln. And the Gemara answers, the Mishnah is discussing a case where they were already rolled and dried. So the Gemara says, but there are still three actions lacking, and the Mishnah answers, this is a place where the local custom is that the one who purchases the clumps of clay is the one who removes them from the kiln, so there's only two actions lacking. The Mishnah teaches that one may set a price for plaster after he has sunk it in the kiln, and based on this, the Gemara challenges the opinion of Rav. Why is this permitted, but there are still several actions lacking? Burning it, removing it from the kiln, grinding it. And the Gemara answers, the Mishnah is discussing a place where the local custom is that the one who purchases the plaster is the one who grinds it. And the Gemara asks, and according to the opinion of Shmuel, who says that if all the actions that remain are done by human hands, then even if there's 100 actions, he may set a price. So why do I need this statement that this applies only after he has sunk it in the kiln? And the Gemara answers, say when it is fit to be sunk in the kiln. And the Mishnah teaches that one may set a price for the clumps of clay prepared for use by a potter. And the Gemara, the sages taught, one may not set a price for the clumps of clay prepared for use by a potter until they are fully formed. And this is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yosef says, in what case is this statement said? It is said with regard to white earth, from which superior clay pottery is made, but with regard to the simple and inexpensive dark earth from which ordinary clay pottery is made, such as that of Kfar Hanania and its environs, or that of Kfar Shichin and its environs, one may set a price immediately, since even if this one does not have any in his possession, that one does have it, as black earth, dark earth, is a common commodity. Right? So again, this idea that even if you don't have it on hand, but you're talking about something whose established price is set, so that even if you don't have enough inventory yourself, you could just go to the merchant next door, buy some, and then sell it to your customer. So then we can say it is ready to be delivered. The Gemara relates, a Maimar gave money to a seller of clumps of clay only from the time that the clay was brought into his house. In accordance with whose opinion did he act? If he acted in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, does Rabbi Meir say that one may not set a price until they are fully formed, but there is no need to wait until the merchandise is delivered to his house? And if he acted in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, doesn't Rabbi Yosef say that one may set a price at any time, even though one does not even have that clay, because somebody else will have it that he can get it from? So the Gemara answers, actually, he ruled in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. But in a Maimar's locale, earth suitable for making clay was scarce. So much so that even black clay was not common. So consequently, if the clay was brought into his house, he relied on this and he gave the seller the money. But if not, he did not rely on it, because if he gave money and then the seller didn't have it and he was going to have to go out and buy it for a higher price, right? So then it would turn out that who was it? That a Maimar gave money to somebody who then used that money to purchase something that cost more than that, and then delivered, right, what it was worth later to a Maimar at a higher value than what he paid for, and that would be like a loan with prohibited interest. That's why a Maimar didn't rely on the guy until he actually had the goods on hand. New subject. Our Mishnah taught that one may set a price with a buyer for manure on any of the days of the year, and that Rabbi Yosef permitted this only if the seller had a pile of manure in his dunghill, whereas the rabbis permitted it in all cases because dung is always available. The Gemara asks, the statement of the rabbis is identical to the statement of the first Tana, so what is the reason to repeat it? And Rav has said the practical difference between them is with regard to the rainy season. According to the first Tana, one may set a price for the future delivery of manure at any point of the year, including the rainy season. But according to the rabbis, one may not arrange for the delivery during the rainy season because manure is not commonly available at that time. Now we're on page 74b. The Mishnah teaches, our Mishnah taught, one may set a price at the highest rate meaning he may set a price for the future delivery of produce and stipulate that if the market rate falls below the agreed upon price, he will purchase the product according to the lowest price in effect in the market at any point during the year, which is the price that will provide the highest amount of merchandise for the amount that he agreed to pay. When he says highest rate, he means cheapest. Highest in the sense that he will get the most merchandise per coin that he is paying. So there was a kind of agreement where you could say, to a merchant or to a farmer, okay, I'm agreeing to pay you at the market rate, but the market rate I'm agreeing to pay at is the lowest market rate that will exist between now and 12 months from now. So whatever the market rate gets down to, that's what I'm purchasing at. The the Gemara relates, there was a certain man who gave money to sellers in order to buy jewelry for the dowry of his betrothed. Right? So basically, this guy is going to marry a woman. So her father has agreed to provide a dowry to his new son-in-law, right? To the prospective husband. They are betrothed, and that the betrothal was on the agreement that there would be this dowry. And so the father has to provide a dowry. But his son-in-law is actually in the jewelry business. So he says to the son, okay, well, look, you're definitely going to get the best price. This dowry is going to go to you. So basically purchase jewels with this much money that I will give you. And, it's obviously in your interest and in mine for you to get the most possible jewels for this amount of money. And since you're in the jewelry business, you're going to do better than I would do, right? So that's what the father-in-law says to the son-in-law. So the son-in-law, the prospective son-in-law, stipulated with the sellers that they would provide the jewelry in time for the wedding. Okay, so this is how much money I'm giving you. Give me jewels worth this much money, and you have to get them to me before the wedding. That was the deal that the son-in-law, the prospective son-in-law, made with the gem sellers. Ultimately, the jewelry for the dowry became less expensive. The market price went down. So the betrothed man wanted to retract his commitment to buy the jewelry at the higher price, with the price that they had agreed on, and he's buying this on behalf of his father-in-law, but on behalf of himself, since ultimately he's going to get it, but it's before the wedding, right? So before the wedding, this stuff belongs to his father, his prospective father-in-law. So on behalf of the father-in-law to be, this young man is acting as the agent, and he says, this is the price that I agreed to pay. Okay, make sure you get it to me before the wedding. So they get it to him before the wedding, but in between the time of when they made the deal for a certain amount of jewels and the wedding, the price goes down, right? So he's saying, I can't do that deal. That's not what my prospective father-in-law wanted. He wanted me to get him the best price. And now I would be getting him less jewels than I should be getting if I just entered into this deal right now. So the parties, so he wanted to pull out of the deal. The gem seller said, well, we made a deal with you. Okay, too bad the market fell when we made the deal. We made the deal according to the market price then. Now you have to pay when we deliver the gems. So the parties came before Rav Papa for a ruling. Rav Papa said to the betrothed man, if you set a price with the seller to buy the jewelry at the highest rate, meaning you agreed that you would get jewelry at the best price that's going to be available between now and delivery, okay, well then they have to honor that. But if you didn't say that, if you said, okay, this is what the market price is today, I will give you this much money for this many gems. So if you didn't say that, then take the price that you set initially, right? What was the contract? Did you negotiate to say, I want the best price that's going to be available between now and delivery? Or did you say, I will pay this price, and then the market fell after that? The sages said to Rav Papa, and if this young man did not stipulate that he would purchase at the best price, must he take the merchandise at the price that he set initially when he came into that agreement. But this is a case where he paid money. And giving money alone does not affect acquisition. He never took possession of the gems. He never acquired the gems. He only paid money. And we said a bunch of times that if the only thing that's happened is that the money changed hands, the transaction has not been finalized. It's not finalized until the merchandise changes hands. When the merchandise changes hands, even if the money hasn't been paid, the transaction has been finalized. But if the money changes hands, the merchandise hasn't yet, you could get out of the deal, but the one who walks out on such a deal will have on his head the curse of the one who exacted retribution from the generation of the flood, etc. Right? So this is a case where he paid money, and giving money does not, by itself, does not affect acquisition. Well, Rav Papa said to the sages, I did not mean that it was an actual acquisition. Rather, I also agree that giving money does not affect acquisition. But what I said was, with regard to the young man accepting upon himself the curse, he who exacted payment from the generation of the flood, etc. So if the betrothed man set a price at the highest rate, then the buyer is right. And if so, the seller is the one who retracted, and therefore the seller accepts upon himself the curse he who exacted payment. But if the betrothed man did not set a price at the highest rate, then the betrothed man, meaning the buyer, is the one who retracted, and therefore the buyer accepts upon himself the curse, he who exacted payment. Right? If he had negotiated, I want the best price available between now and delivery, and then the other one said, oh, we're not going to do that, we're only going to sell it to you at the price that when we originally agreed on, then they would be the ones subject to that curse. But that's not what happened here. So Ravina said to Rav Papa, from where do you know that the ruling of the Mishnah, i.e. that if he did not set a price according to the highest rate, he must acquire the merchandise at the price he set initially, that this is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Shimon and who say that giving money does not affect acquisition? And even so, those rabbis say that if he set a price at the highest rate, he takes it at the current price. And if he did not set a price at the highest rate, he takes it at the price that he set initially. Right? From where do you know that if he didn't say, I want the best possible price, that he didn't actually get the benefit of that bargain? Why does he have to state that? Perhaps the ruling of the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who says that giving money affects acquisition, and therefore, if he set a price, if he negotiated for the best possible price, available at any time between the money changing hands and the delivery, he takes it at the price that he set initially, since giving money affects acquisition. Right? So maybe that's why you have to honor that first price, because there was acquisition when the money changed hands. That's according to Rabbi Shimon, but that's not the law. But according to the opinion of the rabbis, whether he negotiated for the best possible price throughout this period or not, he gets the best possible price, because a person's intention is always to acquire merchandise at the best possible price. If they didn't specify what the deal would be, then the default position should be that he gets the best price available during the period of the transaction, from when the money changed hands to when the gems were delivered. Rav Papa said to him, say that Rabbi Shimon said his ruling that giving money affects acquisition. Right? Rabbi Shimon, the minority opinion, said that when the money changes hands, the deal is done. Now there's nothing to talk about. The price isn't going to change because the acquisition is done. Maybe they're going to be delivered later, but the transaction has already been finalized. That was Rabbi Shimon's view, but we don't hold by that. But now he's saying, well, what was Rabbi Shimon saying? Because maybe that's going to help us understand what the majority view is. Rav Papa said to him, say that Rabbi Shimon said his ruling that giving money affects acquisition in a case where there was one price, meaning that the price didn't change in the meantime. But did Rabbi Shimon say his ruling when there were two prices, right? The market rate changed between the giving of the money and the taking of the merchandise? Certainly Rabbi Shimon will concede that the buyer can withdraw from the sale if the market price changes, as if you do not say so, then the curse of he who exacted payment will not apply to the buyer under any circumstances, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, because why would anybody withdraw from the deal? Now you could say somebody withdrew from the deal because his own personal circumstances changed, but apparently the curse that we would apply is because somebody is withdrawing from a deal in order to get a better rate somewhere else. But if the price never changed, then when would that situation arise? Now you could say, well, some buyer showed up willing to pay more, or some opportunity to sell it in another city came up. But for the purposes of this argument, Rav Papa is saying, well, if the price doesn't change, then that curse would never apply. And since Rabbi Shimon says that there is some situation in which that curse would apply, it must be that there were two prices, and that Rabbi Shimon's view doesn't apply only when there's no change in price. So Rav Papa clarifies, what is the meaning of in any case? Does it not mean that there is no difference whether it is the buyer and no difference whether it is the seller who withdraws from the sale? That either way, the person accepts upon himself the curse, he who exacts payment if he withdraws from the transaction in order to get a better price or more merchandise somewhere else. So rather, it must be that when Rabbi Shimon is saying that giving money affects acquisition, he's referring to a case where there was one price, but in a case where there were two prices, even Rabbi Shimon would agree that giving money alone does not affect acquisition, presumably, or that at least if you pull out of it, you do have to get that curse. Okay, I am very close to done, so questions or comments, please get them in now. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, but let Rav Papa derive the law in the case of the dowry, employing a more straightforward reasoning. That would be nice. The father-in-law initially made the betrothed man an agent, and since he was an agent, the father-in-law could say to him, I sent you to act for my benefit, not to my detriment. Purchasing the jewels at a more expensive price is to the detriment of the father-in-law, and therefore the agency and the sale itself is nullified because the agent did not act within his agency. Rav Ashi said to him, it is speaking here about a case where the father-in-law did not actually make him an agent. Rather, the betrothed man was a merchant who buys and sells merchandise, and the father-in-law understands that he engages in commerce and that he will not always profit from his trading. And so the father-in-law undertook that risk, and you can't say that the transaction is nullified because he didn't get the price for his principal. So bottom line, it seems that unless he negotiated to have the best possible price between now and delivery, he's going to have to honor his word of what he agreed to pay at the time that the money changed hands. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 8 here in chapter 5. We'll pick it up, God willing, tomorrow at the regular Wednesday time, 6 p.m. Pacific, with Mishnah number 9. I am seeing 2 questions. Sharon says, my class today learned about the 10th commandment of coveting. The yesod, right, the foundation of that commandment, is very reminiscent of this scenario. You cannot force a sale by someone who does not want to give up their property, right? As also we saw yesterday that the guy faced with a fraud committed his own kind of fraud, and we said that the second fraud wasn't a fraud because he didn't want to give up his land. He was just doing that to defend himself from that attack, and you're exactly right. Very interesting that we never assume that somebody would want to give up their own land, certainly, or sell anything if there's any kind of duress involved. Why is duress involved? Because somebody covets what somebody else has. Very good. Tom, so he can't just return the money because price levels and the value of money changed and can't repay it with interest, so he has to buy wine even if it's more expensive. I think you're talking about the agent who neglected his duty. So here, I think what we're saying is it's not interest, it's a penalty, right? Because he neglected the terms of his agency, he's going to have to go buy it at a more expensive rate. But from the principal's point of view, he's just getting the benefit of what he bargained for when he sent this guy to get wine. And if the guy had fulfilled his agency, he would have been able to execute the task at the price that they agreed on. And it's only because he neglected it and the price went up in the meantime. So it's not interest, rather it's a penalty on the agent for neglecting his duty. That's what I've got for us. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific on Wednesday. Have a great night.